room. Y'all didn't get the message that it's National Wear Red Day, did you?
Oh.
Heart Disease Awareness Month, the whole month of February, so keep that in mind. I'll let Pat come and introduce our speaker.
All right, good afternoon. By popular demand, we have Jeff Fleming, otherwise known as Mr. Kingsport. And, Jeff was our city manager up till 2019, which coincidentally was the year I became mayor. I really hated to fire Jeff. I like Jeff. Okay, I lied. Although Chris hadn't been okay with you. No, Chris. But no, Jeff is a lifelong resident of Kingsport, and he had over 35 years service to the city, starting as an intern and then rising all the way to city manager. He's now a passionate volunteer. He's leading the Move to Kingsport program, which showcases the region's advantages. He's an East Tennessee State University alumnus. Jeff and his wife, Christy, have two children, Caitlin, a Denver-based periodontist, and Zach, a coach at Dobbins-Bennett High School. Jeff actively supports local causes, including education, economic development, and tourism. His efforts earned him honors from the Kingsport Chamber. You're a lifetime member as the Kingsport Chamber. That's a big deal for a guy that came from government. So he's a lifetime member of the Kingsport Chamber, and he was recognized as the 2022 Northeast Tennessee Hospitality Professional of the Year. And I would conclude the introduction by saying that if you don't see Jeff's weekly email, you ought to start reading it, because it really gives great information about our region, and he's going to speak about that. And Jeff, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. I think about whether I could go to another civic club in another city and see 3 city managers, 2 mayors. When I think of Ryan and Chris and the time that we spent together, of course, Ronnie as well, and Daryl as well. But it just brings back so many fond memories. And to be able to recognize that we all just carry the baton from one leg of the race toward making this a much better community is just driven home by the fact that we're all still here and we're all still trying to help in any way that we possibly can. So John Campbell had a term that he sprung on us called pragmatic idealism, and I have thought about that for generations. And so as I was reading this, I thought, that's just a fancy way of saying pragmatic idealism, right, John? So the ideal community grows sustainably, fostering a vibrant economy that enhances the quality of life for all its citizens. All things in moderation, as my grandmother said. So I spend a ton of time talking to folks about what is the right size city. We go on recruiting trips, most recently to Long Island, New York, and it's kind of like, well, on the sliding scale, what do you need? Do you want an international airport? If you have an international airport, you're going to get traffic and that sort of thing. If you go too rural, then you're not going to have DoorDash if you want it. So just as an example. So I spent a lot of time thinking about that. And I'm telling you, as many years as I have analyzed this, I always come back to Kingsport is just the best place to be. I mean, I firmly believe that, not just because I live here. So today, what I'd like to do is a little bit different than what I've done in the past, and that's answer some of the myths about the Move to Kingsport program. Early on, when I first started talking to y'all about this, because it was a 1999 economic summit outcome, so we've been doing this for 25 years, and it kind of got momentum because initially people didn't believe people were moving here from out of state, and then they started saying, okay, I get it, now slow down. So we've had enough. Let's take applications rather than have people move here. And so, believe me, if it gets to the point that it's starting to erode our quality of life or cause problems, I'm going to be the first one to call Chris McCart and say, pull the funding, buddy. It's time to stop this thing. But that's not the case. So who is moving here? Why are they moving here? Do we still need newcomers? Are they overfilling our roads and schools? And are they driving up our house prices? So we have started showing up in all kinds of national publications. Now, if you know anything about economic development, you know that a lot of these are paid ads. This is not a paid ad. So we didn't ask for it. We didn't solicit it. We didn't know it was coming. But Wall Street Journal, Realtor.com, and USA Today independently recognized Kingsport, Bristol, and Johnson City as the top housing market in the South. That sounds almost too good to be true. Why would that be? So I delved into what the methodology was that they used. So 15% is based on real estate demand based on page views per property on Realtor.com. 15% on supply based on median days on the market. 15% median list price trend based on annual price growth. So very specific things. I mean, if you put the inputs in and it spits out the answer, it's not a subjective thing. 10% is based on property taxes. 10% on climate risk, which was huge for us because all of the coastal cities ended up being knocked out of the list because of climate risk. We're nestled up here in the hills and mountains and protected, so we benefited from that. 10% retail amenities measured as the average number of stores per specific everyday splurge category: coffee, upscale, specialty grocery store, home improvement, fitness per capita in an area. It goes back to what I was talking about, your ideal place. When you think about a day in your life, where's your pharmacy? Where's your doctor? Do you have the amenities nearby to meet your everyday needs? I came up with that idea on my own, and then to see it show up in one of the categories was validating for me. 5% is based on the unemployment rate in your area, 5% is based on wages, and 5% on regional consumer price parities, and 5% share of foreign born. Now, I have no idea why that would be something that they would want to measure, but that's what they do. 5% small business, and 5% commute time. So when you add all that up, you get a score, and that's why we ended up ranking #1 in the South. Now, you've seen this map 100 times. I produce it every month on a rolling 12-month window. But we track water taps. Now, back when we set the program up, we had to measure success. You know, we come from a community with National Malcolm Baldrige Quality Award winners, PALS and Eastman. And if you can't measure it, it doesn't count. And so if you wait for the census, it lags about 2 years. So you really don't know if everything you've done is having any results. But we realize that we control water for a geographic area about twice the population of our city. So we could track those water taps every time you come in to City Hall and you turn on your new water service. They ask you, where your previous address was. They check your driver's license. And so we are able to capture that data on a month-by-month basis. Each one of those dots represents a family that moved here within the past 12 months. So 736 families. You'll notice on the West Coast, Seattle, Portland, California, San Francisco, Los Angeles, for example, and then Denver. Those weren't on our radar before the pandemic. They weren't moving clear across country to come here before COVID happened. Monthly, we also track it. So 40 new families from 15 states moved here this past month in January. So as you can see, most of them are nearby. So they're somewhere in Tennessee or North Carolina, Southwest Virginia, Georgia, but we also have Florida as one of our top donor states. I'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but 40 new families is a pretty significant drop-off. It's starting to level out where it was pre-COVID. So the myth, only retirees are moving here. How many people have heard that? Okay. So I went to the census, the U.S. Census 2023, and you can get a number from the past 5 years. So Kingsport's median age is 44.6, which is an older number, but it hasn't changed that much in 25 years, which means that either more young people are moving here or we're not aging. So 26.3 is the median age for those relocating within the same county. 35.8 is the median age for those who moved from elsewhere in Tennessee outside a 35-mile radius. And 29.9 is the median age for out-of-state movers. Now, I believe that the proliferation of apartment complexes that we just added to our portfolio had a big impact on that. But that's exactly what we wanted it to do. We wanted people to move here when they got their job at Eastman or Ballard or wherever and live here as opposed to live in a neighboring city. And then when they're ready to move out of their apartment, hopefully they will buy a house in the community that they've established roots in. Myth, there's no diversity moving here. So this is one of the biggest questions we get from Eastman, for example. They're trying to recruit a global workforce. And when you look at our numbers, it's pretty scary if you're not a white, middle-aged male or female. And so we looked at the data from the census, and although 94% of Kingsport's population identifies as white, the racial and ethnic diversity of new residents is increasing. So 19% of the city's 1,834 black-only citizens moved here in the past 5 years. 18% of the biracial or multiracial citizens, and 37% of our Hispanic or Latino citizens. So we are getting much more diverse. I spoke to a DB class yesterday, and the professor or the teacher always has them write a thank you note. And I was really impressed by the number of names like Hernandez and Diaz, and they're in the top leadership class at Dobbins-Bennett. So that's not necessarily a name you're going to see up in the holler somewhere, you know. But I also mentioned that identifies as white because when you are using racial data from the Census Bureau, it's how you answer the question. So it's very rare to find onlys anymore because there's so much intermarriage. I shared with the United Way committee a while back working on the Hope for Racial Equity that we had a teacher at Dobbins-Bennett who taught Spanish. And she was from Peru. Now, her name was Carter. She married somebody from Carter's Valley. And so, but she's from Peru. And so she said, oh, I'm so excited. My parents are coming to see my son wrestle his senior year. And I said, well, that's great. Well, introduce us to them. And so they walk in, and the mother looks, I mean, like every Inca picture you've ever seen from Peru, but the father is Japanese. And so I felt like I had a good enough relationship with the professor or the teacher to say, I said, hey, Kathy, you could have prepared us for that. I didn't expect to see a Japanese dude walking in as your father. And she said, she goes, oh, did you not know that Peru was where it was one of the most open countries for Japanese migration after World War II? I said, well, I had no idea. And she said, oh, the past president of Peru was of Japanese descent. And oh, by now we're on half Japanese, quarter Japanese, eighth Japanese, you know, because of intermarriage and stuff. And so it made me think, if he was answering the question of the U.S. Census, he would be a Hispanic Latino because he speaks Spanish because he's from Peru, and he's from a Latin American country, so he's Latino, but he's Japanese. So you just got to be careful about those kinds of things. The fastest growing, the Census Bureau has changed it now to where it's like check all that apply. So that when you start looking at racial statistics, it's one or more races, two or more races, 3, 4, 5, and it's just trying to put all that together is crazy. So we're overrun with out-of-state buyers. So although there's much hype about out-of-state relocation, it only accounts for a very small percentage of our newcomers. So 8% of our newcomers relocated within the same county. 4% came from elsewhere in Tennessee, outside the Tri-Cities area, and only 2% relocated from out of state. But that's a very important 2% because most of them voluntarily came here. They cashed out a bunch of equity where they were from before, and they're bringing that money to spend here, to buy and churn in our local economy. Now, to help you understand the importance of that, one of the blog posts that I did recently that Pat made a comment about, if you're interested in checking it out, it's kingsportspirit.com. Kingsportspirit.com, and you can sign up for email delivery if you like. But I've got a tale of 3 cities here. So I had a previous mayor one time that was lamenting about Kingsport not growing like when he was growing up. And I said, so remind me, when did you grow up? Graduated in the 50s from DB. And I said, okay, so Kingsport had 0 people in 1917, basically. by 1920 had like 5,000, by 1930 had 15,000. So it was exponential growth because everything was brand new. The whole city was brand new. And I had seen a newspaper article in Hilton Head where, in my mind, Hilton Head is idyllic, right? We always aspired to be Hilton Head when in the 1980s in city planning, the small signs, the natural colors that blended in with the surrounding nature and all this kind of thing. But the issue now is the aging population can't see the signs because they're so small and dim, and the houses blend in so much with the background that it's hard to discern where you're supposed to turn and stuff like that. And there's no workforce housing on the island. And many of the houses are ground level, which you can't build now in a coastal area. So they have a ton of inventory that is not up on stilts and safe from flooding like new construction would be. So on the other hand, just across the bridge, Bluffton is just growing like crazy. And so they went and hired the Bluffton city manager to come figure out what to do with Hilton Head. And I thought, that's what happened to us. Kingsport showed up all within a 30 to 40 year time period. Everything was brand new. Everything was brand new. All the houses were new, the schools were new, growing like crazy. I would argue that that's the easy time to manage because Jim Crumley, who worked in Johnson City, went to Murfreesboro one time and he made a comment I won't forget that said, he goes, they don't really have to manage in Middle Tennessee like we did. They just outgrow all their problems. Whatever they don't do, they turn around and it just grows back, and they don't have to make tough decisions because that's what happens. So it led me to start thinking about, well, what does Kingsport look like, and how would we compare to a city that is in a boom cycle right now? So I know it sounds odd, but I met a builder in New York who's doing a ton of work in Wilson County and Sumner County. So I looked at Lebanon, Tennessee. So the chart on the left is Kingsport, the chart in the middle is Lebanon, Tennessee, and the chart on the right is Johnson City. So the blue line represents people that moved from within the same county. So you see in Kingsport that's declining. You see in Lebanon that's increasing, and in Johnson City it's declining. Moved from a different county in Tennessee, it's declining in Kingsport, increasing in Lebanon, and it's declining in Johnson City. But moved from out of state, and that's what makes up our losses, is the green line. So you can see from 2014 till now, it has started to curve up. So if we didn't have that curve up, we would be declining in population. And if you are declining in population, that means businesses are going to start closing. It means that all kinds of negative things associated with declining population. Lebanon, on the other hand, is growing in every single sector, which means it's hyper growing. So does Lebanon need to recruit newcomers? No, it does not. Johnson City has more impact from out-of-state movers than even we do. So how does that add up? Well, I'll get to that in 1 second. So if you're not growing, you're dying. That's a comment from Strong Towns. The myth is we're growing too fast. We're losing our heritage. It doesn't feel like the same community anymore. But you got to have 5 to 10% growth per decade, not per year, but per decade, just to be able to stay the same. Kingsport's projected growth is 6.5% through 2030. So we are right in that sweet spot for maintaining what we have, not outgrowing and causing problems. Now, that sustainable target that I described, on the left, you can see it pretty well. In Lebanon, you can barely see it because the growth trend is so outside the sustainable target that it's where Kingsport was in the 40s, 50s, 60s, that time period. And then Johnson City, you can see, is outside the sustainable target as well. So if you hear someone, well, let me make sure you read this correctly. So Kingsport's population in 2014 was just shy of 52,000. And if the current growth trends continue, we should be somewhere near 60,000 by 2028. Lebanon was just above 28,000 in 2014. And if their current growth rate continues, they should be close to 70,000 by 2028. Johnson City is currently at, well, in 2014 was just above 63,000, And if the current growth rate continues, they'll be above 83,000 by 2028, okay? So when you hear someone from Johnson City complain that there's too much traffic on I-26 or State of Franklin Road is congested or whatever, they have a point, okay? That is not what's happening in Kingsport. So be careful about generalizations. There can be specific areas where there are issues, but we are in a sweet spot and we're on track to stay in that sweet spot. And if we take our foot off the gas right now, we will start declining, and we don't want to do that. So Lebanon, just because my son's involved in high school sports and is always curious about 6A high schools and things like that, Green Hill High School showed up in 2020. Has anybody heard of Green Hill? They won a state championship. Green Hill is between Mount Juliet and Lebanon. Opened their doors day one as a 6A. Now, Mount Juliet is also a 6A. Lebanon is also a 6A. Wilson Central is also a 6A. Gallatin is now a 6A. And so every one of those schools are in the biggest category that they can be, and they're going to be stressed to be even bigger, build more schools if that growth rate continues, which there's no indication that they're letting up. So moving to Kingsport by calendar year. So when John Campbell came on as city manager, he had really gotten Johnson City on a roll with development at the Ridges and Boones Creek exit and places like that. And so he had recognized that single family housing was an important component of economic development. For whatever reason in Kingsport, we had the mentality that a single family residence took more than it gave in taxes. And so there was never a push for single family. So John challenged us to think differently. And he called us together in a management team meeting and said, what's the difference between the Boones Creek exit and the Rock Springs exit? And we, of course, everybody's afraid to give the wrong answer because you want to impress the boss, right? And he's like, there is no difference. People can live at Rock Springs and work in Johnson City and Bristol and Greenville, just like people live at Boones Creek and work in Kingsport. So if you're not capturing the regional housing market, you're losing an opportunity. So that set us on a path to really try to maximize that Rock Springs corridor. So Danny Carr shows up, wants to do the Edinboro. There was success in Johnson City with Lake Ridge Elementary, surrounded by a single family neighborhood. So kind of emulated that in Rock Springs with John Adams Elementary. And if you recall, when John Adams opened, there was a lot of conversation about, gosh, there's only 200 students in a school built for 500. What if we build it and there's not enough students? Guess now it's fine. It's completely full. And actually some rezoning had to take place to send kids elsewhere because John Adams was so full. So just as soon as John got us going, the Great Recession hit. And so had all these subdivision lots platted and ready to go, teed up, had sewer incentives so they could buy sewer tap fees at a fixed rate early on, just to prime the pump, anything we could do to kind of get some interest from builders in the region. Got all that ready, Great Recession hit, and so through 2009 really took a hit on the ability to move to Kingsport because you couldn't build houses. So what happened after the Great Recession? The issue was mortgages were too easy to get, and they weren't, the lending standards were pretty lax. So like many pendulum swings, it went completely the opposite direction, and you had to sign away your firstborn to get a mortgage. You couldn't get money to build a new subdivision, and it just tightened up dramatically. Now, we had all these lots, which was great because they were already approved, but it was still hard to get a loan to build the houses. But slowly and steadily, we started doing that. And so over a period of time, you see up and through like 2014, we were seeing about 500 households a year moving here from greater than 35 miles away. But then you get out to 2018, and we're almost at 700. But then you get to COVID-19, and we're up to 900 that are moving here a year. But then it dropped back off, and now we're what I would say we are moving back to a sense of normalcy. But we're still significantly higher than we were in 2007. So it's not like the curve went so far back to where we were in 2007. It just went back to where we were before the pandemic, pretty much. Now, there's a lot of ebb and flow in the pipeline of housing. And we went through a phase here recently where a ton of lots were created, a ton of homes were built. As fast as they were built, they were sold. And many of those homes were D.R. Horton homes. And as they came to East Tennessee, they focused on Johnson City first, then they came to Kingsport. Now they're moving into Bristol and Greenville and other places, and even outside city limits. So when they would come in, they would do, an 80, 100 subdivision, lot subdivision, and it was production built. And so, well, we're sort of at the tail end of that. I mean, most of the stuff that they've had in the pipeline has been built and sold. There's one active one up at Magnolia Ridge, which is just off Rocky Branch Road near Westridge High School. But it's filling up. Again, they're selling them as fast as they build the houses. So one of the things I like to do just to say, okay, once we go out and recruit somebody to move here, where are they going to live? And we have a ton of traditional homes, worker cottages, historic neighborhoods that are fantastic. But everybody doesn't want one of those. Some want new construction. So just to look at new construction, so this is only homes that were built since 2020. As of this morning, I went and updated it. How many are available in Kingsport, Morristown, Oak Ridge, Jonesboro, etc. So in Cleveland, there are 89 homes for sale right now. 22 below 300, 34 in the 300s, 25 in the 400s, 8 in the 500s. And you can go all the way down and you see we are the absolute last. We have 8 right now that's new construction. So now there are some things in the pipeline like Brickyard that are about to take off. But the reason I'm saying this is you've got to encourage your elected leaders and your city management folks, help them be successful. Let them understand that we can't let our foot off the pedal at this point in time. If we don't have more houses to sell, we're not going to have success. So another way to interpret this is, let's say a doctor comes and is going to relocate with Ballard, and they're probably going to buy a house over $500,000. And let's say they want new construction. Well, if there's 6 in Johnson City and 6 in Jonesboro and 0 in Kingsport, where are they going to move? And they're going to work here. So it's just something we always need to be cognizant about. I don't want to overplay this, but I want to encourage us to keep our eye on the prize, because that's really important for what happens in the future. Myth, our schools are overfilling. So you can look at the enrollment numbers from the state or whatnot, but there's also population under 18, which would include preschool kids, that's available in the census. So in 2022, there were 10,834 people under the age of 18 in Kingsport. In 2017, there were 10,728. So there is not a groundswell of students that's going to overrun our schools. Most of the school construction that's been done in Northeast Tennessee has been rebuilding old facilities, combining facilities like Westridge, for example, to North, South, and Central. The projects that are currently underway in Kingsport are replacing older facilities and giving them modern facilities and right-sizing them, but it's not necessarily because of exponential growth, like I talked about in Lebanon, for example. So our school-age population is essentially the same, but compare our entire region to only one county in Middle Tennessee. There are 50,000 students in Rutherford County Schools, Murfreesboro. That's one school superintendent for 50,000 students. You add Washington County, Sullivan County, Johnson City, Kingsport City, Hawkins County, Greene County, Bristol City, and Greenville City together, and that's about the same as Rutherford County. So just to put yourself in a mindset and a perspective of what is happening in Middle Tennessee versus what's happening in Northeast Tennessee. Now this is hard to read, but really it's just the pattern I want you to look at. So the yellow are Kingsport City schools, and the pink are districts that adjoin Kingsport. So the State Board of Education produces a report card every year by school. But what they don't produce is a school zone. So for example, if I live in the same house and my child's going to go to an elementary school, and then there's zone for middle school, then there's zone for a high school, I have to put that together myself. And so I just did that homework for all of us. and this shows all of Northeast Tennessee. So there's 42 different combinations of school zones within Northeast Tennessee. Now, what I want to do is zoom in, and this is just the top part of that same chart. So that yellow here, it's the same chart. So Kingsport has the first, second, third, and fourth place position in the whole region, 7th and 8th, and then tied for 11th. There's not one school zone in Kingsport that's below 11th in the entire region. Now go back, the closest adjoining Kingsport was Gray, and it came out 19th. The next one is Holston, Sullivan Central, and West Ridge, and it's 20th. And then 41st out of 42, for example, is Ketron and West Ridge. So, Kingsport City Schools is doing an amazing job. I would be remiss if I didn't point out, I know that a lot of y'all do work with Kennedy and Roosevelt. Those were county schools that the city took over. If you go to those facilities today, they are as well maintained as they can be. The floors are shining, but generally they are the same facility that we inherited from the county years ago. The only thing that is different is what's happening inside. So when you tell me that Kennedy and Robinson and DB is doing better than Town Acres, Liberty Bell, and Science Hill, that's pretty impressive to me. So it's like we tell our kids, don't judge a book by its cover, don't be influenced by outward appearances. That's what's happening inside. The same thing goes for our schools. If you drive by our schools, many of them are 50 to 90 years old, and they don't maybe give the best impression to a newcomer that thinks, the one out in Washington County is awfully shiny and new, and the neighborhood across the street is awfully shiny and new. But look at, this is Boones Creek. It's 14th. Boones Creek scores lower than Roosevelt and Kennedy. But it's impressive structure, isn't there? So myth, our traffic is terrible. So there is a TDOT traffic history website, and if you want to cure insomnia, you can go check it out. So Kingsport's main arteries have less traffic than 5 years ago. So Stone Drive East going toward Bristol, everybody always used to tell me, oh, everybody's going to the Pinnacle. I said, well, I get that maybe, but why is the traffic count going down? So it's 3% less today than it was 5 years ago. I-26 east of Meadowview toward Johnson City is down 1%. Stone Drive west towards Hawkins County is down 11%. I-26 east of Rock Springs toward Johnson City is down 8%. Fort Henry north of I-81 in Colonial Heights is down 2%. And I-26 north of Stone Drive toward Virginia is down 2%. Now, normally, if I'm telling you that traffic is down, that usually connotes a bad thing because it's, people aren't working, people aren't shopping, people aren't moving around. It's an indicator that we're declining. I'll get to that in a minute. Kingsport's main arteries have less traffic than 5 years, but it's a little different story in the region as a whole. So I-26 west of Gray is up 4% coming toward Kingsport. South of Airport Parkway toward Kingsport and Knoxville is up 17%. Now that has a lot to do, I'm sure, with the opening of the new high school up there. I-26 east of Gray is up 8%. I-81 north of Blountville is up 15%. I-81 north of Airport Parkway is up 25%. And 11 east south of the Speedway toward Piney Flats is up 35%. So again, if you live in that area in Piney Flats, they keep building those houses, chances are 11 east get a little more challenging every morning. That's not happening in Kingsport in spite of all the new houses that we've had built. So to compare it to the state as a whole, I-24 east of Murfreesboro is up 15%. I-40 east of Knoxville toward Sevierville is up 30%. I-65 south of Spring Hill toward Alabama is up 20%. I-40 west of Cookeville toward Nashville is up 18%. And I-40 west of Arlington toward Memphis is up 44%. And I-24 east of Clarksville is up 18%. So the region and the state are similar in how fast the traffic's growing, but Kingsport specifically is not experiencing the same thing. However, retirees and anyone else not in the workforce are a large percentage of Kingsport's population. So replacing retirees with younger workers is very important to maintain a healthy workforce and keep a strong economy. So 46% are not in the labor force in Kingsport. They're either retired, they're a stay-at-home trailing spouse, they don't work outside the home for whatever reason. 38% are not in the labor force in Johnson City. 42% are not in Bristol. So when you talk to an employer that's trying to run a restaurant and they say they can't find anybody to work, that's what they mean. They can't find people to work because our cost of living is so good that you can get by without working in many cases. I mean, you have one person stay home and one person work, for example. Myth, we have to leave town to shop or dine. So if traffic is going down, but sales tax is going up almost 30%, that's a good thing, right? Because many of those locations I shared with you were pass-through traffic that could be driving from New York to New Orleans. Do you really necessarily want to be dependent on a true interstate that you have to contend with local traffic and pass-through traffic all day long? Kingsport doesn't really have those. So you're isolated enough off the through traffic. Sales taxes or sales tax collections are going up, and when you adjusted it for inflation, that's up 8%. So that's an impressive number to me. So what do you do with an abandoned Walmart and underutilized parking? So you build new houses. So that parking field sat for 15 years dormant. And one of the things that many people don't know is that Walmart is a category killer. So what they do is when they have a piece of property and they decide they're going to move to another piece of property, they have legal clauses on the property they're leaving that they negotiated when they went in the first place to say, you cannot put anything on this property that sells anything that Walmart sells. Well, what doesn't Walmart sell? So that's why it sat empty for so long. So nowadays, since we are collecting sales tax on internet sales, mobile purchases, that sort of thing, it makes sense that every house in the old Walmart parking lot, if they're sitting in their recliner watching the football game and decide to order something on Temu, we're going to get the sales tax collection. So it has shifted focus. I find there's still a lot of folks that are stuck on the shopping center has to be in your town. And don't get me wrong, that's a good thing. But it's more important to have people with disposable income in your town to supplement that as well. So that's one of the reasons why it makes sense to build houses where you used to have retail facilities. Myth, we're full. Every time I go on Facebook or something like that and somebody goes into a group and says, I'm thinking about moving to Northeast Tennessee, what do you think? All these smart aleck posters get on there and say, we're full, go somewhere else, we're full, we're full. We're not full, okay? And we need them, and we don't need to be treating them that way. So Northeast Tennessee, every single county, and if I drill down, every city had more deaths than births. And if I zoomed out, I saw an article recently in the Roanoke Times, that trend continues all the way north to beyond Roanoke. Every single county, every city, up into West Virginia, up into southeastern Kentucky, and really beyond in many cases. But when you look at who moved to Tennessee, especially during COVID, there's a line of demarcation. The Tennessee counties did well. The out-of-state counties did not do as well. So people were very intentionally looking for Tennessee. For whatever reason they were looking for Tennessee, they were looking for Tennessee. So Hancock County had 124 natural change, which means they had 124 more deaths than births. They had 315 people moved in. So that was a 14% impact over 10 years to Hancock County. Now, everything is relative, but if you're already small and then you're shrinking, that's really challenging for your local economy. Let's look at Sullivan County. We had 2,753 more deaths than births, but we had 5,337 people move in from outside the county. So they offset the losses and moved the needle in a positive direction just a little bit. Not an overwhelming amount, but just a little bit. So that puts us at about 8%. But then Unicoi County, and this was before Helene, they lost population and did not have enough to offset it from outside. So they're on a trajectory to shrink. So think about Unicoi Walmart, for example. If the population is declining and you're trying to sustain a store, the first time Walmart hits a hiccup and has to close an underperforming store, Unicoi County may be one of those that's on their target list. So that's what we're trying to avoid. But to put things in perspective, let's look outside the region again. Murray County, where Columbia and Spring Hill is, Wilson County, Montgomery County, Rutherford County, Williamson County, They're growing 33 to 25% per decade. So what did I say was necessary to sustain? 10%. So they're growing 2.5 to 3.3 times more than they need to offset. So when you meet somebody from that area and they start complaining about growth issues, you understand that they're telling you the truth. There really are growth issues. But there are also declining counties, and we always tend to think that if we don't do anything, everything will stay the same. That's not true. Sometimes you have to work twice as hard to stay close to the same place you are. So there are counties that are declining across Tennessee. Many of those are rural, but Shelby and Davidson County are two that had they lost 18,000 people during the pandemic. And they did have more births than deaths, but they lost people moving out. This is UT Knoxville produced a looking forward to 2020 to 2040 growth projection. You know, I told you 10% to sustain the economy. That orange line is the goal. The blue is where we are. Of course, you can see that many of the Northeast counties are not growing fast enough to stay there. So when you hear regional conversation about growth, understand that we're relative to the rest of the state. The ones around Nashville and Sevier County and Gatlinburg and Cookeville, for example, you see what trajectory they're on. But then looking back, UT also provides information to show what happened in hindsight, and you see where Kingsport is at 0.6%. So, but you see Murfreesboro is at 3.1%. So again, it's all relative. So when I first came to work for the city, Rutherford County had about the same population as Sullivan County. So now it is twice that. It's actually more like 358,000. So if Sullivan County has 160,000, Rutherford County has 358,000 people. We had a TML meeting, and they invited Mayor John Clark to talk alongside the Mayor of Murfreesboro about growth issues. And Mayor Clark naively was talking about the need to build a new fire station, and Murfreesboro was building six new fire stations, 6 new sets of employees, 6 new all the apparatus that goes with a fire station. Think about that. And those weren't replacements, those were brand new stations. Locals can't afford a home because newcomers are driving up house prices. That's something I hear all the time. There's a national issue with house prices. It goes back to 2008 when the mortgage lending standards were changed. Builders went bankrupt, some never came back. And so they're not building houses to accommodate the need nationwide. And so when you look at ours, though, 42% of all the houses in Kingsport for the past 12 months ending May 2024 sold below $200,000. 28% sold in the 200s, 17% in the 300s, 7% in the 400s, and 6% above 500,000. So we have an ongoing conversation with the Homeless Coalition about trying to figure out how to crack the code to solve homelessness. And when you say homeless, it automatically brings into the conversation homes. And so then there's an assumption that we don't have affordable housing. And I told him, I said, I hate to disappoint you. I said, but I can't go along with you on this one. I said, we need more houses in the 400s and up than we do below 200,000. So that's just where we are. And believe me, if we end up building more houses under 200,000, we will be the magnet for everybody in the region that's looking for a house in that price point. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but there's a cause and effect in your decisions. Food stamps is another measure that I think is interesting. Negative in this case is positive, and positive is negative. So Sullivan County had a 5.5% decrease in the use of food stamps from 2016 to 2022. That means that incomes grew or people moved in from the outside that had a fewer percentage of need for food stamps. But I was telling you earlier that there's a line of demarcation at the county line or at the state line. And so you see Washington County, Lee County, Wise County, Bristol City, and Buchanan County, they went up. Buchanan County went up 6%. So, we're very blessed. So the best performing was Unicoi and Johnson and Hawkins, where there's 7.5 to 7.8% fewer folks on food stamps in 2022 versus 2016. So when I go to New York and I talk to folks, this is an example of what I used. They want to understand the cost of living in our area. And so I just felt like this was a very simple way to illustrate what I run into. So Suffolk County, New York, which is most of Long Island, it's not the closest to the city, it's the furthest out. So $350,000 house would pay $5,950 in property taxes. I just assumed $100,000. That's a very personal number, but $100,000 just to be even. That would be $4,175 that would pay in income taxes. So the total would be $10,125 that they're paying on a $350,000 house, and that goes up to $20,000 in property and income taxes if your house is $950,000, compared to $6,000 in Sullivan County. And then I threw in Brunswick County, North Carolina, which is the county between Myrtle Beach and Wilmington, and then also Beaufort County, because they're retiree destinations. And so you see that Sullivan County has a very favorable tax rate. And when people come up to that booth and say, so Retire Tennessee pays for this booth, and they're a state agency, so they're not paying the same that Del Webb, Sun City, and people like that are. And so we're in the back 40, way back off the beaten path. And, we have a nice enough booth, but it's nothing like the private developments. And we used to be lonesome for a while. But now it's like as soon as the doors open, they're stacked 4 or 5 deep, per person. There's 3 people working the booth, and we're each talking to 3 or 4 persons at a time. And so we're trained to ask them the question, are you interested in Tennessee? And invariably what they'll say is, I never have been, but my investment broker says I should be. And it's like, well, why does he say that? You don't have a death tax. You don't have an estate tax. You don't have a personal property tax on cars, boats, and RVs. You don't have an income tax. And so I can cash out up here and I can move to a more favorable location. And for us, that's a positive economic impact. I was talking with a guy that was very blue collar, wearing his veteran's hat. And he came up and he goes, man, I never really wanted to move. He said, I've lived in the same house forever and it's been paid off forever. He said, it's now worth $2.75 million. He said, I wouldn't pay that for that. He said, but if I sell it, I can take that, and that is my nest egg to come to Tennessee. I hear that over and over and over again. So the other thing that's favorable about Tennessee from a consumer standpoint is when a property reappraisal happens, the tax rate is rolled back. And so the out-of-pocket for the consumer is protected. So many of the pensioners that I hear, like in New York, it's like a retired school teacher. He says, well, I retired, but my property taxes are going up so fast annually, it's going up faster than my income. And I don't know how I'm going to pay my taxes. But in Tennessee, it rolls back. So just for effect, I went back and looked as far back as the state comptroller's office had information online, which was 1997. And I said, what if a $250,000 home, what is the tax rate for Kingsport and Sullivan County each year? And then how does that trend over time? Folks, it's trended down for the city of Kingsport. So when I see this, and I didn't really see this when I was city manager, probably thank goodness, but you understand why the city manager is ready to pull his hair out every time the budget rolls around. Because what other organization do you know where that income is going down and you're supposed to make it work one more year? So I have long been a proponent of trying to figure out a rate that you're comfortable with and stick with that rate. And then if the property values go up, keep that rate so that you can pay your employees, pay for equipment, rely less on debt and more on cash and things like that. The county has actually gone up a little bit. Now, a lot of that is because of pent up issues like the jail and things like that, but they've gone up. But the combination of the city and county together, so if you live in Kingsport City, that green line is what it would look like for you. It's pretty much still level. I ask you what state in America you could live in where your taxes are going to be pretty consistent since 1997. So Tennessee in general does a great job. And I would point out when I say $250,000 county appraisal, that's probably a $450,000 house on the market just because the county appraisal is significantly less. So in summary, out-of-state movers from the past 5 years account for only 2% of the city's population. We still need newcomers to offset natural population loss. Much of Tennessee does not. Don't generalize all of Tennessee with us because we still need it. Kingsport's on track to grow 6.5% by 2030. And remember, 5 to 10% is required for stability. Of all the homes sold in the past 12 months, 70% were less than $299,999. 70%. Traffic counts declined in Kingsport, while up modestly in the region. Population under 18 has been stable for 5 years, and schools are not overcrowded or at risk of becoming overcrowded. While traffic in schools are declining or stable, sales grew by 8%, adjusted for inflation. Those are all very positive metrics. Our diversity is small, but it's growing 3 times faster than the general population. So I'll leave it where we started. The ultimate goal, all things in moderation, and hopefully what I presented to you today shows in facts and figures that we are in that sweet spot and are projected to continue being that way.